Now, when Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and proclaim his message in their cities. When John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one to come, or are we to wait for another?" Jesus answered them, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet." This is the gospel of the Lord. Last Monday, I went for a walk in our neighborhood through Enger Golf Course, which I do a lot. I mistakenly thought there would be a packed-down snowshoe trail I could walk on, which was only half true. I was up into my thighs every third step. But what a gift of a day it was, because I was the only one out there, and instead of power walking up the hill, I repeatedly had to stop my exhausting trudge and just get to take in my surroundings, the great expanse of white and the blue, blue, blue sky. And I was just laughing out loud for the silly predicament I found myself in, and for how beautiful it was and how alive I felt. I finally emerged at the top of the hill onto what I call the Twin Ponds Trail, which I know very well. I walk it a ton, but with the deep snow covering the bushes and the leaves off the trees, I got a little discombobulated. I was like, is there supposed to be a house there? Where did that house come from? Where am I? I had to look around, double checking to get my bearings to see if I was indeed where I thought I was. Winter offers many gifts, but one of them is that it helps us see differently. It helps us see afresh and anew, to see things that might in another season be hidden. Winter offers a different lens upon the world, something we, with our limited vision, need. That's something that jars us awake, helping us to see. The meteorological seasons of the year do that. The seasons of the church year are meant to do that. And the gospel, regardless of meteorological or liturgical season, is also meant to do that. To wake us up, to surprise us, to help us to see and experience God, offer us a lens in which to look upon our lives and the world. Jesus asked those who are following him, "What are you looking for?" It's a good question for all of us. What are we looking for? What are we looking for in life? What are we looking for when we come to worship? What are we looking for in or from our God? What we are looking for affects what we will see. For instance, as your pastor, when you come to worship, I always want you to be looking for someone new, to be Christ's presence to that new person, to look not for your friends or for the ones you know or are comfortable with, but to look for the stranger, for the guest, or for the one you've seen but not yet met. There's also the question, how do we know if what we're looking for is the right thing to look for? Job's friends, including Elihu, whom we hear today, were looking for ways to blame Job for his suffering. For them, God was the origin of everything that happened. So if Job was suffering, God was causing it, and for a good reason. Lots of people still like to look through that lens. If people are suffering, they must have done something to deserve it. Sometimes we cling more tightly to our lens than we cling to God. The crowds gathering around Jesus, interestingly enough, do not seem to have a need to blame John for his finding himself in prison. But they are struggling to understand why he is there. We followed this guy who pointed us to you, who stirred up our hope, but now he's been arrested. So Jesus asked, as we just heard, well, what did you go out in the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? Did you expect somebody weak and instead found someone willing to challenge the status quo to the extent that he's now sitting in prison? Did you expect someone dressed in soft robes, the power garb of the day found in kings? John dressed in camel skin. But even John sitting in prison seems to be having his doubts. Are you the one we've been waiting for? Or should we look for another? It's easy to doubt, to become blinded to possibility, blinded to other people's lives, to who Jesus is and to the things he says are being done in his name. I hear in John's question the need to be reassured, to hear again what he himself had proclaimed, that Jesus is indeed the one we have been looking for. So if John, who announced Jesus coming, if John, who had preached a challenging, fiery word and had invited people into this new way, if he, finding himself in dire circumstances, needed to hear, and good for him, wasn't ashamed to ask, are you really the one? In other words, tell me we haven't been duped. Tell me I haven't done all of this for naught. If John needed that reassurance, how much more so do we? We are bombarded with so much that is painfully wrong. It is so easy to fall into despair and wonder with John, are you the one? Or should we be looking for someone or something else? With the brutal beating to death of Tyree Nichols, one more Black man unjustly killed at the hands of police, will police departments ever reorganize themselves to stop taking the lives of Black men that should still be alive? We have camera lenses to show us, but when will we truly see? With the new mass shootings in California, will we ever act on gun safety legislation? 90% of Americans agree on universal background checks. Most agree on locking unloaded guns and ammunition away so that 6-year-olds don't get a hold of loaded guns and take them to school and shoot their teacher, like what happened in Virginia. And enough people can agree that automatic military-style weapons and high-capacity ammunition feeding devices should not be on the open market. We keep finding ourselves seemingly in the same place, asking the same questions. These are from Steady by Dan Rather. Who can forge progress in the face of such sadness? What can we as average citizens do? When might we see a new reality? Where will the next tragedy occur? How can we get this to stop? Are they questions of hope or questions of despair? Are you the one to come, or are we to wait for another? The irony is that it is despair that drives the mass shooters to kill others on their way to killing themselves. Deaths of despair, they are called. Change seems unattainable. That's where the despair seeps in for us until it comes seemingly all at once. But it's the years of pressure from thousands of advocates that continue to ask the questions out of undeterred hope. Gun legislation will happen. It will happen because of people like Joan Peterson and Mary Strufert and the young people from Parkland and the parents of the Sandy Hook children and Steve Kerr, the coach of the Golden State Warriors, whose father was gunned down in Lebanon 40 years ago. It's no surprise that the people who will lead the rest of us are the people who have experienced the darkness of losing a loved one to gun violence. As St. Paul says, let light shine out of darkness. They invite us to look through a different lens. But here's what I've been thinking. The bigger hurdle maybe isn't gun legislation, but the despair behind the violence. We want the problem to go away, and as impossible as it seems to pass legislation to make a difference in this and so many other societal problems, that is probably the easier thing, the external thing. The harder question is why in a country that other people are desperate to get into, a country that others see as a land of hope and promise, why are we a country with so many people so deep in darkness that they cannot see an alternative to picking up a gun and blowing people up before they kill themselves? I wonder how these perpetrators would answer Jesus' question. What are you looking for? I imagine some would say, I stopped looking long ago. Or they say, I can't see any other way out. Or they would name things that can never deliver on their false promises, the things that Paul says the God of this world uses to blind the minds of the unbelievers, to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ. The unbelievers are not those people, but they are any of us when we stop trusting that Christ is the one with the power to save and turn instead to guns, to violence, to something, to anything else instead. One has to imagine that mass shooters are residing in a very deep darkness, that they are seeing the world through the lens of despair. We lose sight left on our own. Is it any wonder that the people who commit these mass shootings are almost always loners? But by God's mercy, we have been engaged in this ministry, which gives us a community and a lens of hope to help us see God in our lives and in the world. We have been given the lens of Jesus Christ so that what is hidden to the naked eye, we can see. A light that shines out of darkness, a light that no darkness can overcome, a light that we come together and we work together to magnify so that others, especially those in deep darkness, can also see. In the name of Christ, who is our light. Amen.